It's the Whisky Wizard.
Welcome to the Whisky Wizard, where we say whiskey making takes scientific knowledge and artisan skill and dedication, and a bit of the wizard's alchemy of light, air, earth, and fire. Okay, this week we're going to take a quick break from our series on whiskey making. Tonight's show will be our last before the 4th of July, as we'll be off on July the 3rd. So I wanted to cover a little bit about our nation's founders as it relates to the topic of whiskey. James Madison was known to consume a pint of whiskey a day, but that, it seems, may have been a bit below the average for the time. The average colonial citizen was about a bottle a day drinker, as distilled spirits and fermented drink were much safer to consume than water, and most people, including children, had a tankard of ale with breakfast. And the head of the household would likely include a dram of rye with his day's start as well. According to the Smithsonian, colonial Americans drank roughly 3 times as much as modern Americans, primarily in the form of beer, cider, and whiskey. In Colonial Spirits, A Toast to Our Drunken History, author Stephen Grass tells us this level of consumption was integral to the revolutionary spirit. As he writes, "In the drink, a dream, and in the dream, a spark." Reverend Michael Allen, who illustrated the book, adds that from morning until night, people in the 18th century drank. Benjamin Franklin was quite unabashed about his love of the cups, as it were. And it's noted as him having said, "Beer is living proof that God loves us." Taverns offered many services, such as conveying mail and messages. They were also the center for obtaining the day's news and for having political discourse. Basically, they comprised the hub of daily social life. For the Founding Fathers, inns and taverns were where one would go to get the inside scoop on political adversaries and posit agendas for which one hoped to gain favor. Ben Franklin, reports historical author Stabe, used taverns as his tool for diplomacy. For him, eating, drinking, and gossiping were negotiation tactics. It was in taverns that the Founding Fathers, emboldened by liquid courage, to quote Stabe, and likely, after tying a few on, unfettered by the rarefied rules of governance to which all of history had subscribed, honed the concepts contained in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Whiskey's rise in America was due in large part because it didn't have to be imported. Unlike rum, which was made from sugarcane and molasses, shipped from the British West Indies to distilleries in New England, whiskey could be distilled here using domestic ingredients such as corn, rye, and barley, which were quite abundant. It is said that it was the British tax on rum, more so than on tea, which most inflamed the Bostonians to revolution. Thomas Jefferson, at his home in Monticello, was known for repeatedly trying his hand at wine grapes in an attempt to emulate the great French wines he had grown up on. But to no avail. The climate was not dry enough overall, and the winters too cold for quality vine. He did, however, take to malting barley for beer and, combined with corn and rye, began making on his estate what was known as a grain whiskey, probably not too unlike today's Canadian whiskeys. He drank claret in more refined settings, but we're told loved his whiskey when conducting late-night political and negotiating sessions. George Washington was also fond of Portuguese Madeira, but it was whiskey that really fueled his passions. In fact, it could later be said that Mount Vernon was the whiskey-making capital of the colonial world. George entrusted the distilling at Mount Vernon to the Scotch-Irishman John Anderson, who, after trying wheat, eventually hit upon making his whiskey from corn, rye, and barley, which of course is the basic mix of grains used in most of our current American whiskey mash grain bills. Mount Vernon soon became the most successful commercial distillery in Virginia, selling over 10,000 gallons of rye whiskey annually. His whiskey consisted of 60% rye, 35% corn, and 5% malted barley. No doubt George thoroughly enjoyed the product of Anderson's efforts. I assume when John Anderson arrived at the local tavern with some of George's prized spirit, no doubt he saw all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied he's on his way. Archaeologist Dennis Pogue, one of the heads of preservation at Mount Vernon, is the author of Founding Spirits, a book about George Washington's infatuation with whiskey and his prominence in beginning what was to become the American whiskey industry. Pogue went on to excavate Washington's once prolific distillery and to rebuild it pretty much as it was. Today, the folks at Mount Vernon still dress in period garb, where they have been making our founding fathers' signature rye whiskey again since 2006. In 1797, rye whiskey made there is still one of the most coveted bottles sought by modern whiskey enthusiasts. Back in the day, most whiskey was barrel-aged for about 2 years. They of course noted that the longer the spirit lingered in the barrel, how much the better it was, and this eventually led to longer aging times overall, although never attaining the level ascribed to Scottish whiskey. So not only did Washington play a pivotal role in the founding of our country, he also appears to have founded the American whiskey industry. Hey look, all of us at the Whiskey Roundtable, Big G, Karen, myself, and Zach, want to wish you all a Yankee Doodle Dandy time this 4th of July holiday. Our country isn't perfect. We have our problems, as recent events would point to. But there's nowhere else where one can live as free as we do, thanks to these founding fathers, their courage, and their brilliance. And lest we forget all those servicemen and servicewomen since who have paid for that freedom with their blood. Freedom ain't free, folks. As I said, last time in our series on the making of whiskey, we covered the mash, and it's the complex and interesting distillation step that we'll cover next time on the Whisky Wizard. I'm Doug Dunbar, the Whisky Wizard for the Whiskey Roundtable, and now back to the live show.